One of the things that comes up quite a bit is this idea of, you want me somewhere else? Is this idea of like, hey, it's ROS2. Are we able to like get ROS2 running backwards? I think Kat did a really good job of describing, hey, there are things happening. Friends from ROS AP and Christoph shared some of their client and partner success stories. You're going to hear Mark later talk about something they're doing in ROS2 as well. But this is meant to be a little bit more of a frank conversation, and not everyone had immediate success, right? So what were some challenges, right? And what are some things we had to do to work together to kind of address some of these challenges? And do we feel like, hey, is ROS2 really going to help us down the road? Well, so with that being said, I was going to kick things off if someone can share a little bit of like kind of their initial impressions of ROS2 and their industrial applications. And with that, let me introduce everybody first. Sorry. On my right, your left, I have Mark Haynes. He's a leading future factory at Spirit Aerosystems. I'll do a more formal introduction later. Mingu Kang, and he's with ARIS Technology, CEO, and they do a lot of basically bringing metrology to robotics and making it part of the process. And Amadio, the name of the new organization, Advanced Autonomy and Applied Robotics, and your lead architect, right? And so a lot of you may know Lou. He's been like kind of behind the scenes helping us all with like ROS2, Windows, and HoloLens projects. So it's great to have all three of them in here. And I guess where I wanted to start is like, first of all, like, what are some initials when you first started looking at ROS2? What were some of your initial challenges? Just as an example, can I get a volunteer to take that first?
Sure, I'll go first. It started at the very beginning where it was just training. Our team has a deep working knowledge of ROS1, and we have an understanding in our minds of how ROS is supposed to operate and how we expect it to operate. As we transition to ROS2, sometimes we have to learn things and break our understanding of what is the correct workflow for design and implementation. And then getting past the learning curve aspect, focusing on before some of our technologies for documentation was highlighted. Our team relies heavily on example information, whether it's through forums, just web postings, to drive that narrative process. I think one last piece of information where it was basically additional challenges is working with our vision, ROS framework. Just subtle differences in the framework. There are just very small tweaks that might break something for us that would create kind of a long lead time to identify the root cause of corrective action. So that comes with working through the learning curve at the same time as we're working through the process of code.
Maybe you have initial challenges.
Absolutely. The training piece was difficult for us as well. I don't think we're as an expert in ROS in general. ROS1 became more familiar in our documentation, so our team sort of ramped up. Then we transitioned to ROS2. And one of the big limitations for us was having to do it on Windows. So we're not an expert in DBS communication either. So what happens is we assume that we can transfer, we do a three-dimensional data transfer. So we could, okay, I know we send 20,000 points or 10,000 points, but it just doesn't work. Maybe the lack of knowledge on our own to configure these yet, or maybe to remove settings. But as an example, we have to basically divide those communication to 200 points and send them consecutively. And I believe that's actually our company's communication that we are doing this work. But it was not easy for us to find documentation or support or even internal engineering support to figure it out. So that would be one example of limitation.
Before I hand off to Lou, I mean, I guess I want to talk, Lou's been helpful in some of these challenges, in particular with some of the configuration items around ROS2, and in particular as we approach more successes or challenges and overcoming challenges relative to Windows. I mean, you work with it, maybe you can probably add a little bit of context on that.
So we actually started working with ROS2 before it had a release. For we were actually switched tasks based on customer engagement. The way our organization works is we have the engineering team who is responsible for building products. My primary product is actually Windows at that time. we have several other organizations, labs, customer success engineering, who work more directly with customers to onboard them onto Microsoft platforms, whether it's Windows, whether it's Azure, whether it's mixed reality, or other products. So as an engineering team, we often will do something called co-engineering, where we're saying we're going to build a product around something, and we're going to work directly with one customer. You can't win big if you don't win small first. So we work with one customer, validate their scenario, work with them. We ended up starting with ROS-2 because it actually was open robotics that committed to supporting those at that time. And we started working with them. But our first co-engineering partner was like, well, we want to work with ROS-2 eventually, but we really need ROS-1 right now on the factory floor because we have problems transitioning our product, our prototype code from the lab onto the factory. So that's actually where we went back and said, okay, let's reevaluate ROS-1, see what it would take to support it, and then move to ROS-2 and do this. So we've actually been working with ROS-2 since the very beginning and ROS-1 later. Today, when anybody comes up and says, we want to work with you on a project, I will say, let's start with ROS-2. And then they say, what robot should we use? And then I go, oh, great. I'm going to a little ashamed to admit, we just started a project last week with an intern, and they said, hey, can we borrow a robot? I said, well, all of the robots that I have are kind of committed to something, but I do have one robot, which is a clear path jack. They said, great, can we use it? I said, well, it's running ROS-1. So what's even more interesting is that it has an Azure Connect on it, which doesn't support 24. So they're actually using robotic detail. One of the things that I've seen is OEMs are hesitant to move to new versions of Bluetooth, which also means that because of the distro affinity for ROS-2 or even ROS-1, if OEMs aren't supporting the version of Bluetooth that use ROS-2, you've got I hope that was a long-winded conversation, but
no, I think it addresses a lot of the issues where everyone has their unique challenges, right? I mean, we talked about at lunch, I was talking about some of the challenges we had at Caterpillar and just trying to use different hardware. As you get more into, like, say, solving problems with ROS, you now have this issue with distributions, OEM support. We talk about ROS distros, but you brought up a great point with the as well. I mean, so like right now, like we touched on a couple of challenges, but there are some successes, right? You know, Mark is going to touch on the big ones too. But like, what has been beneficial to you guys to start working on this?
So one of the main benefits for us working on ROS-2 deals with the aspect of where our product or development and spirit is going. And where we're heading is into a product solution that is going to be a distributed computing architecture to solve major aspects of our aerospace manufacturing system and solve the problem through multiple simultaneous solutions working together. And that's where with the kind of some new communication protocols in ROS-2 and kind of separating ourselves a little bit from the server client concept, we just have a solution platform where every aspect of the system, whether it's just individual node sensor systems or where it's independent programs, are all able to work with each other simultaneously in an elegant. What we found is as we implemented our technology into the factory floor, our ability to do exception handling when we lose some of our connectivity or when only a portion of our system is operational became a major sustaining issue for our solution. We expect to be able to solve much of these problems in ROS and be able to grow the platform. So from our point of view, I think it has been more so communication with the clients. I think the security and reliability point of view is extremely valuable there has been always skepticism in these laws. And even for ourselves, we're using also for simulation and planning. But now there are indications that we're actually building large gantry systems, for example, looking into using loss control, because that will really give us more flexibility in integration. So that when we say this, hey, can we use ROS control or ROS for our production systems for you, would it be okay? And the response times will positive to one aspect. The other is also we recently started building AR-based systems where we mount whole bunch of sensors on an AR, which implies that we're going to run more than one system in one facility. In that case, I think we are going to hopefully prevent the single point failures in that particular topic. So we're very hopeful and encouraged on that topic. And finally, I would say, generally speaking, I don't know how the community has been developed further, where I think ROS2 community seems to be more mature in their nature. I'm very excited we can be with
Well, that ends like my camp question, but I really wanted to highlight, right? So we have Mark is almost representing really the end user. So somebody's trying to solve practical problems. You know, lose the other end of the spectrum where they're providing some services, solutions. Both, like, obviously, everyone's familiar with Microsoft, right? So we got robotics, right? And then Mingu works in between, right? He's trying to like leverage a lot of these tools, which we talk about, and deliver solutions with the mindset of actually staying in business as well, right? So that's why I wanted to ask, right? So I've worked a little bit with each one of these organizations, right? And what was interesting to me was, our challenges in various aspects. And as Mingu alluded to, right, the promise of ROS2, right, to actually deliver a more bankable, reliable solution with certain levels of security, performance, using this notion of single point failure. That's it for my prepared questions. I want to open up to the audience and have a conversation about ROS2 adoption, transition, and successes and challenges. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, Jamie.
You want me to speak with Mike or Sure. I don't know. That's better.
That's short. I can repeat it for the people.
Oh, you repeat it. Okay. So, I heard a tone of a little anxiety in people. There's still concerns. So I wanted to see if any one of the panelists would say, hey, this is the biggest thing I'm worried about. Moving forward with ROS2, bring it into my solution in my business. This is the thing that I want the community help address to mitigate my anxiety.
Yeah, so Jamie's question is about mitigating end user, what's the relationship between the community addressing anxieties for end users of looking to deliver solutions?
So the biggest things that I do have is sensors, compute, and actually supporting ROS2, not just a version of ROS2. There are other systems. How do we actually get the ecosystem to move forward and migrate at the same cadence that ROS2 is? That's my biggest anxiety. One of the things we do, I'll go to various companies based on solutions that I have in play and try and either, if they're open source, actually make changes to support them or ask the companies to support them. But one person asking doesn't mean two people, three people. You've got to make a critical mass. I think it was Kang who said that, have you actually gone out and filed a bug? If there is a bug, actually put a little emoji on there that says thumbs up, and that counts. They actually will give you a count of how many people put thumbs up. So if they get 10 people who are saying, please support 2004, or please support 2204, that actually says more than someone like me.
It's related to the OEM topic. I think actually we are very excited about the discoverability of the DBS devices. So if I can connect this plug and display, this sensor, this robot, that reduces our cost of integration significantly. However, what that means is I assume all these sensors and all this camera. So and it doesn't exist, and I'm wondering if OEMs would actually do that, like all the time, to keep it up, or is that the community's role? So what I'm concerned about is as the architecture matures more, it gets potentially more complex. And who's sustaining which layer? Are we going to grow that? That's the concern, because we cannot do it.
It was really great talking with Nathan and Pat as well, a reference, like even taking advantage of a show like Audit. We were just over on an exhibition board. And like a lot of us walked up to different booths and like, hey, what's your ROS situation? Hey, you know ROS2 just ordered a pump. What's your driver? You got a driver for that, right? And if more than just Kat or Nathan or myself do that, right? There's both, yeah, GitHub. But I know certain OEMs aren't even on GitHub, right? So sometimes it actually it's legwork. And that's actually why we have a consortium, right? So like the guys at Cat, folks at Spirit, right? We're a collective, like kind of trying to rattle that cage a little bit with certain OEMs with to say that they're a little bit slow to get on the ball. That's hopefully how we work together. You have an additional comment, Kat?
Yeah, I was gonna say, one other thing is large boards, if that GitHub icon indicates that they come to a large board that spends a lot of money with that OEM. It really helps.
Yes, so, and that's actually interesting, right? And that was like a lesson learned for me. Like I would go maybe click on something like that, but I had it on my personal GitHub. There was no tie to like, I was with like a big Fortune 50 company. So that is sort of like, you'd be surprised how many developers there is when they're like, hey, do you know somebody from like GE was poking around or somebody from Spirit or Boeing? Right, all of a sudden there's a little bit more chatter.
I love it. Blue says, I'm from Microsoft. They love this to be fixed. It's suddenly things get fixed, and I'm really proud of them.
That's right. Thanks, Jamie, that was a great question. Yes, Nathan?
Yeah, I have a follow-up for who in particular. I can imagine with smaller companies, you know, the people involved in decision making might be pretty close to the full stop GitHub issue. But for larger business units, what's, you know, how do we get engineers to escalate that to the right people?
The question was, how do we get larger business units, or when small industries need, or small companies need help and they're interacting with large business units, how do they get like sort of the escalation to solve issues?
So I can't comment for all big companies, but when you find a bug on my GitHub, it emails me. So it comes directly to me. I'm not gonna go talk to Dan. So we're here. I don't know how it is on other companies. Small companies actually tend to be really responsive. Like I'm talking to the engineer who wrote it because their GitHub issue goes against them. Larger companies, it really depends. We have made lots of contacts with the engineers, but the escalation path can also goes back to what's the scale that they're going to get if they do that work. So it might be a significant amount of effort on their part, but if they don't have one person asking for it, it's a challenge. You need to have, I think, confident people asking for it.
Good question, Nathan. Thank you.
I can add a little bit, maybe.
That's the big company that uses this stuff.
Yeah, we're a very large company, well over 1,000 but our actual automation robotics is small relative to the size of the company. Automation robotics is core of our industry is the aerospace manufacturing. Producing the aerostructures to our OEMs. I guess one of the points that I was going to add related towards some of the topics that give us what we have the most anxiety about. I would simply say it comes down to training, which I think the consortium is doing a great job of addressing this, making training available to everyone. As we get more training in ROS2 and the providers of the sensors get more training in ROS2, ultimately that ROS2 integration is going to come. For our organization, we're actually not really too concerned about the individual device drivers. There's a lot of, for our applications, we're getting custom device drivers in UX, and it's worked out very well for us. We've taken all that ownership. But at the end of the day, for us, it's going to come down to a competitive market assessment. Our automation developments are done purely off the business case, and we're going to pursue an automation application because it's got a strong business case, and that ultimately comes down to how much does it cost for us to get that sensor? And that cost includes a non-reporting portion, which is development of device driver. Well, whatever sensor company provides that to us at the most cost-effective solution in our design environments, that's what we're going to go with. So ultimately, that market pressure, I think, Eric, what we could maybe focus in on that is just in 3D cameras. There's quite a few different ones available in the market. Some support us to better than others. Well, simply for us, we're going to go and pursue the companies that are staying up to date. And much of our new application development is heavily ROS-I focused, as anytime we're starting something, so we're going to be pushing for what gives us the best long-term sustainment and support. Something that's unique in our industry is, and applies to many manufacturing industries, is that the technologies that we develop have the potential to have a very long operational life of the factory. And so we design, we win our projects based off of a 5-year net present value, but we design for 10 to 20-year lifetimes in the factory environment. And got plenty of examples as I walk through my factory every day of technologies that are decades old are doing fantastic out there, adding value to the company every day. That's what we look to develop.
Any other questions from the audience? Next one. Yeah, oh.
Just one change to tone a little bit. I'm kind of curious how would anybody else in the room look ahead 5, 10 years and have a wish list. What does the state look like?
So the question for those online, like put on your future glasses, 5 to 10 years, what does the ROS-2/ROS industrial ecosystem look like? For panel or human?
So I hope, and this is just me, typically, I hope that ROS-3 is different from ROS. So we. Well, one of the things I see with the Haynes actually present how C++ bindings are done, the fragile base class problem. The distro affinity comes from some of just how those bindings are put together. If it was all based on ROS, it would have CMake, set of launch Python for launch files, just top to bottom code.
I actually follow up on Lumix that we were pointing to. We've been talking a little bit about ease of use tools, making sure it's more good work that you're doing, trying to make things more accessible. Absolutely right. The theme is what we do to enable more people. So my vision is that big undergrads are doing more rock stars and maybe wrong. We have more utilities, better tools, that over time get more active. And for those of us who have spent a lot of hands-on time with industrial robots, I mean, Robot Studio, MotoSim, they're really cool tools, right? And it's actually not so hard to get kind of pretty dangerous with them, right? But like, what can we do to provide that level of enabling, me, the former, just regular welding guy, get dangerous with this tool? What is the equivalent of robots? We all look forward to that. You're in that boat too.
Yeah, and from the integrator's point of view, if I can run a long time from now, maybe Roger would like this. But if I can run ROS control to use all the strength and say capability of each OEM, that would be amazing.
Question.
Yes, Roger Christian.
Is NVIDIA doing anything at the chip level to ROS?
The question is about NVIDIA chip level interoperability. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from NVIDIA here. If anyone wants to make a ponder, if there's no reflected.
The comment in terms of onboarding some of the accessories and programs, environment, for instance, where it comes to compliant vendors and accessory manufacturers, put it up. So it puts a little pressure on them.
Yeah.
Their competitor is ROS compliant.
Yeah, it's the Roger from Motoman. Yaskawa made the comment that like, hey, we could potentially put something out around ROS2, so to speak, compliance relative to drivers. Just to like cite it, like have something else out there to sort of light the fire, differentiate OEMs that are playing ball versus those who are not. That's actually an interesting point of feedback. Dan Rosenstein, Microsoft.
Yeah, I actually want to follow up with that. You mentioned NVIDIA as your question. What was the reason you went to NVIDIA rather than any other manufacturers?
It's, you say
It's a shareholder.
I got some gaming computer, but, no, it's, I've heard some rumors that they're trying to create an industrial automation kind of chipset.
Yeah, that is. They just announced a collaboration with Ready Robotics, for instance. Ready not if you're familiar with Ready. So we were, I think, all watching videos up to. To me as like an outsider, it's a little bit vague at this point, but I'm sure plenty of things will be coming out. And hey, we've all, I think most of us in the room probably played around with NVIDIA GPU and have lots of kudos stories to tell. But at least there are tools there. Yes, we're all curious to see how that sort of OEM, if you will, progresses as well, makes it a bit easier. Got time for maybe one more question? Yeah, Akash.
I guess this is almost the age old question. ROS2, open source, how do you? Ultimately, wrote that fact. Put it on this robot, right? How do you defend against that?
So for those online, Akash asked like, hey, how do you manage the narrative or the pushback sometimes you might get by putting open source on a shop floor or on an industrial facility? Parker, you're the end user who's doing some of this.
Yeah, that's something that I can speak to a lot, and I've been one of the ones in my company who urge the utilization of open source. Ultimately, when it comes to open source utilities, depending on what the licensing groups are, open source packages and resources are something that our company can adopt and immediately build a stronger foundation, whatever that subject matter is, and then grow that to be a part of our competitive advantage. Not just on ROS, but packages like CD, CL. We take in open source packages like that and we build that into our solution. That gives us immediately a strong foundation that we don't have any external commitments for. So that minimizes just the non-recurring burden for us to take on that technology, and also sometimes recurring as we talk about utilizing closed source options as some sort of like licensing and maintenance fee. And we utilize both, frequently, fixedly, and interchangeably with each other. Open source gives us an opportunity to have competitive advantage in the market, and I think it's also the topic of, well, if it was, written open source, it might have bugs in it. That's true. It might. So same is also true with closed source. If it's open source, we have an option to correct the bugs ourselves. If it's closed source, we have an option to go back and contact the supplier of that source to get that bug fixed. Ultimately, there's always options, and everything that we develop a factory for, we're going to have tested it and verified that it meets our functional requirements for it goes into production. So at the time it is the production floor, it's no longer an issue for us.
That's a cut short of a great conversation, right? And actually, as we conclude, thank you to our panel, Mark, Mingu, and Lou. All this is going to be floating around, and I look forward to these conversations. What we're going to do now is I got a few minutes here to kind of set up. But again, just take a little break from PowerPoint and work off our lunch. We're going to now have a little bit of like a workshop collaborative small group time. So give us a few minutes. We're going to set up some like white papers. Some of you have done this before for us. But we're going to set up 3 stations. One's around ease of use in tools. That's going to be led by our colleague Jeremy's office in the back there. Paul Evans will be leading roadblocks to adoption. So things like Roger brought up, like about like incentive ways that we maybe can incentivize, like support for interfaces. So Paul will be leading that group. And then Michael Ripperger will be actually just like getting feedback and working with you guys, having conversations around technical capabilities that maybe we're short on, or what's working, what's not. So we'll, I'll grab the mic again when we're ready to kind of get things going. Thanks.